So it gives us great pleasure to welcome our speaker this evening, Christopher Renstrom, who is joining us from Salt Lake City in Utah to talk about the secret history of Saturn. Christopher has been a professional astrologer since 1985 and is the author of Ruling Planets, published by HarperCollins, as well as the creator of rulingplanets.com, an interactive astrology magazine. His latest book, The Cosmic Calendar, Using Astrology to Get in Sync with Your Best Life, is due out in October. Christopher also writes the daily horoscopes for the San Francisco Chronicle and sfgate.com. The Aquarius 7 committee is delighted to have you here with us this evening, Christopher. So over to you.
And thank you, Graham. And thank you, everyone, for inviting me here today to talk about the secret history of Saturn. Now I have to switch to share screen, so bear with me as I do this because I'm not always like the best at this sort of thing. And let's see if we are here. We are. Okay. One more thing, and there we go, my image. It's from the New Yorker. I love this. It's a cartoon picture of extreme Sisyphus. It's what I always think of when I think of the planet Saturn. All right. Marsilio Ficino, the famous Neoplatonist, once said, quote, "Saturn seldom denotes ordinary characters and destinies, but rather people set apart from the rest, divine or bestial, blissful or bowed down by the deepest sorrow." Our story begins, Saturn's story begins, like so many stories do, in the back of a '57 Chevy, or at least its cosmic equivalent. And here is a picture from D'Aulaire's Book of Greek Myths of Uranus and Gaia falling in love with each other. And I love this picture because when you look down at Gaia, you can see that stars are literally in her eyes. And Uranus comes from the Greek word Uranos, which means heaven or starry night. So here he is, the vault of heaven, and Gaia's looking up at him, and they're making love, and beautiful things begin to happen on the earth as a result. Trees sprout from nowhere, rivers run free, mountains rise, fish come flying into the sea and out of the sea, and every time they make love, there's a new glorious titan or magnificent titaness that emerges. New things are coming out of Gaia all the time, and Gaia is made more splendid by her lovemaking. It's intoxicating. They're absolutely elated and in love with each other until the first appearance of a Cyclops. Okay, now for anyone who doesn't really know what a Cyclops is, they're like a one-eyed monster giant. And so Uranus takes a look at this Cyclops and he's like, what the hell is this? And Gaia's like, forget the Cyclops, my love, come back to our boudoir. Okay, so they go back to lovemaking. Polar caps form, rainforests emerge, and there's tumbling grassy hills and grazing zebras, and then comes a 100-armed giant with the BO to go along with it. It's kid number 2. And Uranus looks at it and says, this is the most hideous thing I've ever, or smelt, that I've ever seen in my life. Like, where is this coming from? And she's like, it's coming from me. And he's like, well, why wasn't it a magnificent titaness or a splendid titan? What are we to do with this? And she's like, it's your kid, all right? Like, get over it. Come back to me, my love, forget, and let's make love again. And so they go back to making love, and more beautiful, wonderful, wondrous, lovely things happen as nature expresses itself in all of its bounty. And then come the slithering giants and the giant scorpions and snakes that grow a new head whenever you chop one off. And then there are lions that are part goat and part serpent. And at this point, Uranus is like, enough already. I've like had enough of this. Like, these are like we have to stop. I cannot make love to you. Like, these are like, they offend my senses. These are hideous creatures, these things. And Gaia's like, well, they're your children. And he's like, well, I don't want anything to do with them. And she's like, well, what do you think we should do with them? And she's getting a little bit, annoyed with him. And he says, well, is there any way that we could sort of take these unsightly ones. I mean, you have to agree they're unsightly. She's like, maybe, of course. And he's like, is there any way that we can take these unsightly ones and sort of push them back up inside of you so I don't have to look at them or smell them or anything like that? And Gaia, being a goddess, was like, okay. I mean, it could happen, but not. And so they go ahead and they push all the unsavory children, the unwanted children, up, down and up inside of Gaia so that Uranus doesn't have to deal with them anymore. And as they go on making love, she has more children of, who get not so great responses, and she's collecting quite a brood. And finally, she's in so much pain. I mean, like, try to imagine that for a moment. But anyway, finally, she's in so much pain with all these, children that he doesn't like stuffed up inside of her, that she talks to them, at night. And she says, I need one of you to do me an errand. And they're like, what, mother, what? And she's like, I need one of you to save me from this. I can't take this anymore from your father. This is, and they're like, yes, we will do anything. And she's like, okay, I need one of you to take this sickle and to hide in the dark so that when your father comes to make love to me again, you can castrate him. Who's gonna do that? And all the kids are like, and there's only one who steps forward, and that, of course, is Saturn. So what happens is that Saturn lays in wait in the dark, and Uranus comes down and makes love to Gaia again. And it's at that moment that Saturn springs out of the dark and grabs his father's genitalia, and he hacks them off. Okay, he hacks them off just like that. And then he takes his father's genitalia and he throws them out into air and space. And so the genitalia, which is ejaculating and bleeding at the same time, goes flying like a frisbee through the open air and space. That's my dog. And it lands in the Mediterranean Sea with this enormous splash. And out of this splash comes this frothing ejaculation and frothing blood. And Venus, Aphrodite, the goddess of love, emerges as well, fully sprung, fully realized. Okay, so what's happened here is that Saturn, named after Kronos, time, has, by castrating his father, separated eternity from Earth. Okay, so time now intercedes in the world between eternity and Earth. And what he's done is that he has separated the two from each other, and he exists between, which is kind of a form of interrupt us if you think about it. But anyway, that's what we've got right now. So that everything that is Uranian, is eternal, exists outside of time. Okay, this is the important thing to keep in mind. And then everything that is Gaia exists in time. Okay, so Gaia becomes the mortal coil. Everything living on Gaia, all of the creatures, all of the children are now living in time. They are no longer eternal. And so Venus is born of blood and semen, and of Uranus, and that's its own story. But what I find fascinating about this is that in mythology, everything is call and response. You have Saturn who's separating, and the first to step forward out of that is Venus, and she's a uniting or a combining figure. So basically it goes to the idea that harmony can only happen if there's discord, and hence Aphrodite. Back to the story though, Saturn finds himself caught in an unexpected dilemma. There's only so much time and space to go around now that heaven has been separated from Earth. And Gaia all of a sudden takes on this cyclical nature, okay, where she's birthing things into time, and they live for a period of time, and then they die, and then they're replaced by new things that are being born into time and live and to die. She's almost kind of like a factory or an agenda. She's got a tight schedule to keep with this cyclical life. So it goes birth, life, death, birth, life, death, birth, life, death. And so Gaia's like, I'm bringing on a new generation. She's actually kind of like a cruise director, if you think about it. She's kind of like, I'm bringing on a new generation or a new group of passengers. So everybody off the cruise, and now we're going to, put the new group up on the cruise. So she's getting everything like moving very quickly. Birth, life, death, birth, life, death. It's uninterrupted. It's very brisk. It's very fast. And so Saturn is like, whoa, what's going on here? And Gaia's like, son of mine, eventually you're going to have children of your own one day, right? And he's like, and you're going to be the older generation, right? And he's like, and she's like, well, there's only so much time and space to go around now that we're separated from heaven. So, I mean, no hard feelings, but I think you can understand the idea that you're going to be overthrown, that you're going to be replaced by your new children, and that's the way things are going to be from now on. In order for them to live, you need to go. And Saturn is like, well, what happened? I thought I was rescuing you from my father, who was like this oppressive figure who was doing all sorts of horrible, unthinkable things to you. And she was like, And he's like, but don't I get something for that? I mean, aren't I like a hero? Didn't I do something good? So, and she's like, and he's like, but I thought we kind of like had a deal here. And she's like, no, you're here for a while and then it's next. And then he turns around and there's Rhea, his wife, and she's having children right away. Everything is happening so quickly. And she's having children right away. And as soon as she has a child, Saturn realizes that he's looking at someone who's going to overthrow him, who's going to, make him defunct one day. So as soon as Rhea has a child, Saturn takes the child and he pops it down. He pops it in his mouth and it goes down his throat and down into his stomach. And so one child after another, he grabs, he takes, he throws in his mouth, and it goes down in his stomach. And I don't know if you guys get I Love Lucy over there, but there's a famous episode where Lucy and Ethel are working in a chocolate factory, and the chocolates are kind of like going by very quickly on this conveyor belt where they have to wrap it up very fast, but they're losing pace with it, and they start like, well, that's what's going on between Saturn and his children. Every single birth goes down into his mouth and into his stomach. And the children, of course, are Hestia, Hades, Demeter, Poseidon, and Hera. The last one is Zeus. And when he's about to reach for Zeus, Rhea, his wife in that moment, secrets the baby away and grabs a boulder and wraps it up in swaddling clothes and passes it to Saturn. And so Saturn goes and takes it and he swallows Zeus and it goes down into his tummy, and that's it. Okay, and so that seems to be the end of childbirthing in the Saturn household, but Zeus has escaped. Zeus has been taken someplace else. And of course, it is Zeus in which there's the prophecy that he will grow up one day and overthrow his father, Kronos, Saturn. And of course, this is often the image that we have of Saturn devouring his children, that, it's almost like ripping at meat or chicken or something like that. But actually, it's a different deal that's going on with the children themselves. Here I want to share with you an image that I'm sure you all find familiar, which is the image of the seven spheres. And what you will see, let's see if my cursor, can you see my cursor or not?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, great. What you see at the top is the Father. This is Uranus. This is eternity. Eternity is completely separate from time. And in order of descendants, we go Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, and finally the Moon down here at the bottom. So basically, I like this image because it talks to me again about the idea of Saturn swallowing the children and them going down and staying in his belly. That Saturn here, as the planet of time, the god of time, separates us from the Father, and that we actually are living in the belly of Saturn. We are living in the belly of time. So these children that Saturn swallows, these gods, well, they're gods. They languish in the stomach of Saturn, but they do not die because they are immortals. And so what's basically happening here when Saturn swallows his children is that time stands still, all right? There is no time. It's stopped. He's stopped time. And this is a good idea in Roman mythology, according to Ovid, who wrote quote, "The Golden Age," which is attributed to Saturn, "the Golden Age was first a time that cherished of its own will, justice, and right, no law. No punishment was called for. Fearfulness was quite unknown, and the bronze tablets held no legal threatening. No suppliant throng studied a judge's face, because there were no judges. There did not need to be. Trees had not yet been cut and hollowed to visit other shores. Men were content at home and had no towns with moats and walls around them, and no trumpets blared out alarums. Things like swords and helmets had not been heard of. No one needed soldiers. People were unaggressive and unanxious. The years went by in peace, and earth untroubled, unharried by hoe or plowshare, brought forth all that men had need for. And those men were happy, gathering berries from the mountainsides, cherries or blackcaps, and the edible acorns. Spring was forever, with a west wind blowing softly across the flowers no man had planted. And earth unplowed brought forth rich grain, the field unfallowed whitened with wheat, and there were rivers of milk and rivers of honey, and golden nectar dripped from the dark green oak trees. After Saturn was driven to the shadowy land of death, and the world was under Jove, Jupiter, the age of silver came in, lower than gold, but better than bronze. And that's from Metamorphoses. Zeus overthrows Kronos, forces him to vomit up his children, Zeus's brothers and sisters, and exiles his father to the netherworld beneath the sea. In some versions, such as Boccaccio's Genealogy of the Gods, Zeus actually castrates Saturn as well. But it can also be argued in all of this. I mean, it's interpreted as like he's overthrown the villain and he's bringing about life and the world is going to proceed. But it can also be argued in a way that what took place or happened to Saturn was a setup or some kind of cosmic joke. Gaia pleads with her son to castrate his father so that life might live. But when Saturn does this, he discovers that he is slated to suffer the same fate as his father. Saturn goes from hero to villain. He tries to stem the tide, but is caught between all-seeing eternity, who knows what will happen. Eternity knows what will happen and is indifferent because what is past, present, or future to eternity. He's caught between eternity and the relentless push of cyclical life to generate unceasingly birth, life, death, birth, life, death, birth, life, death. Saturn is a doomed figure. The seven spheres. Saturn is in essence time, the thing that stands between the world we live in and eternity. Saturn is the glass ceiling. Saturn is the limit and the boundary. And we, all of us, are still living in the belly of God. Shabbat. God creates the world in 6 days, and on the 7th day, he rests. This is known as Shabbat in Judaism, the day when you rest and cease from your labors. Shabbat is the day when we are closest to God, when we stand still in time and remember eternity. It was because of Shabbat that the Jews became associated with Saturn. Saturn was among the gods the Romans attempted to equate with Yahweh, whose Sabbath on Saturday he shared as his holy day. The phrase Saturn dia, Saturn's day, first appears in Latin literature in a poem by Tibullus, who wrote during the reign of Augustus. One of the earliest references to this comes from Tacitus, a Roman historian writing in the 1st or early 2nd century CE. Tacitus tells of how the Jews rest every 7th day and let the earth lie fallow every 7th year in honor of Saturn, the 7th and highest of the heavenly bodies. Tacitus does state that Saturn, although not worshipped by the Jews as a god, that Saturn, although not worshipped by the Jews as a god, is considered by them to be the planet with the most powerful influence on human life. Adam and Eve, I think we're all relatively familiar with that story. Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge, or rather the tree of knowledge of good and bad. Most of us might interpret this as acquiring wisdom, a moral sense of what is good and what is bad. But for the Christian Kabbalists, like Bohm, Gichtel, and Weigel, they had a very different take on all of this. For them, eating from the tree of knowledge of good and bad didn't make Adam and Eve wise. Remember, they were already godlike because they were made in the image of God. So they were already wise. There was no good and evil before that moment when they eat of the apple. It's the eating of the fruit of the tree that suddenly the world appears in stark terms of black and white. So, and this was the question that the Christian Kabbalists were asking, so were they waking up to the fact that we live in a world of good and evil? Or did the world suddenly appear that way? And when it did that create the split with God? So Adam and Eve eat the apple and they're exiled from paradise. You can sort of see that going on in the background there. The angels like, get out of here. And they're like, oh no, weeping. Okay, and then they go and live in the world. They move from eternity, all right? Adam and Eve move from eternity to life in real time. Okay, God tells Adam, cursed is the ground because of you. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. And he turns around to Eve and says, and in pain you shall bring forth children. Genesis 3:16, 17. So Adam and Eve begin the hard labor of making the world over in their image. They begin to farm, to toil. They raise herds, they raise children. Life isn't easy for Adam and Eve. Things go wrong. One kid kills the other one, for instance. Their children replace them, as do their children and their children's children, and so it continues. And the stain of that original sin, that fundamental streak of disobedience, of eating the fruit from the tree, is visited upon each succeeding generation. And St. Augustine maintained that original sin was transmitted by male genitals during intercourse, essentially making original sin a spiritual venereal disease, an STD, if you will. This is a woodcut of the children of Saturn. I think this is maybe from about the 14th century. And here you can maybe see the images. What you'll see is Saturn up here with a crutch. Why is he wearing a crutch? Because this is the Boccaccio Saturn. He's been castrated, so he's handicapped. He's also old. He's also weak. He is flanked by the two zodiac signs that he rules, Capricorn and Aquarius. And this Saturn and his children motif that we're seeing the children or the caste, the level of society that Saturn rules over. And the level of society that Saturn rules over are people who have to toil. Okay, people who have to farm. It's not children of the moon who are near lakes and ponds and they can get geese and waterfowl. No, they're people of the earth. They have to bring the water. They have to irrigate the field. Hopefully they won't have a famine. And so they have to work. They have to work the land and make something of it. So that's why you see all of this working. And then he also rules over criminals. There's a hanged man in the back. And he also rules over cripples and people who are handicapped. You see another fellow with a crutch and he's missing a leg, and people who are put in stocks in prison. So if the idea was, if you were born under Capricorn or Aquarius, here's your lot of life. Here's your lot in life. This is the area of life that you will be relegated to. And it's described, the children of Saturn. I'm just going to grab a quick drink. With regard to Saturn, this is a quote, his nature is cold, dry, bitter, black, dark, violent, and harsh. He presides over owners of land, works of construction on estates, over measuring things, division of estates with their wealth. Saturn presides over avarice and bitter poverty. Presides over blindness, corruption, hatred, guile, craftiness, fraud, disloyalty, harmfulness. Over being withdrawn into oneself, over loneliness and unsociability, over ostentation, lust for power, haughtiness, and boastfulness, over those who enslave men and rule, as well as over every deed of wickedness, force, tyranny, and rage. Saturn presides over bondage, imprisonment, caution, reflection, testing, pondering, over much thinking, aversion from speech and importunity, over persistence in a course. He is scarcely ever angry, but when he becomes angry, he is not master of himself. He wishes no one well. He further presides over old men and surly people, over fear, reverses of fortune, fits of sadness, affliction, hard life, straits, loss, deads, inheritances, dirges, and orphanage, over old things, grandfathers, fathers, elders, brothers, misers, over those covered with shame, thieves, grave diggers, corpse robbers, tanners, and over people who count things, over magic and rebels, over low-born people and eunuchs, over long reflection and little speech, over secrets, while no one knows what is in him, and neither does he show it, though he knows of every dark occasion. He presides over self-destruction and matters of boredom. And this is from Abu Ma'ashar, 787 to 886 CE. The earliest example of the children of the planets that I showed you, where a planet is ruling over a part of society and shows activity, the earliest examples of the children of the planets comes from a 15th century Arabic manuscript known as Kitab al-Buhan, or the Book of Wonders. It contains astrological, astronomical, and divinatory texts compiled by Abd al-Hassan al-Ifsafani. I apologize. So what we see here is, again, the planet dominating the zodiac sign. Saturn is riding on the goat, Capricorn, which is associated to him. This is a different idea, this is a different lecture actually, but what we have in these earlier texts is that it's the planet that's primary in terms of power and visualization rather than the sign. Okay, so it's the planet here that is shown as being the most, as being the more important figure. And so what we see here is an old man with a pickaxe or a scythe, really, and underneath are the faces. And if you read from right to left, it goes Jupiter, Mars, and then the Sun. And so this is Saturn in the astrological sign of Capricorn. Here we have Saturn in the astrological sign of Aquarius, the water bearer. I always kind of chuckle when we see these Aquarian images of like with water, and I have a jar and I'm pouring it out. I mean, when you work the land really hard, you didn't go pouring your water out wherever, like you had to go and like. And so that's why Saturn, one of the reasons why Saturn is associated with Aquarius, that and it being the wet season. But anyway, so here you have Saturn, you know, hoisting, pulling water out of the well, and underneath are the faces that we read from right to left, which are Venus, Mercury, and the Moon. But the question that I want you to think about, you look at this figure, and you look at this figure, and here you see it again. Saturn's not, you know, he's here in the heaven. This is from the book, and he's carrying a scythe, and below him is the world that he rules over. But I want you to think for a moment of Saturn and these two people underneath Saturn, and I want you to ask yourself, what color is their skin? Their skin is dark. Rebbe Avraham Ibn Migash, a 16th century scholar and personal physician to the Ottoman Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, held that Saturn ruled over, quote, chains and death and jail and poverty and disgrace and shame from this world and every other obstacle. Insofar as Saturn presides over wisdoms and thoughts, it reigns over the Jews, and therefore they are troubled in this world. And it is appointed over slaves in the lands of the Cushites, which is an ancient African kingdom, which is now situated in the Republic of Sudan. And because it rules over destruction, because Saturn rules over destruction, it undoes all business and government. And because it is banished from this world, it is appointed over the worry and over the filth of people in their actions and in their clothes and speech, and it indicates everything black and decline from the level of their honor, unquote. No, one moment. Rebbe Shmuel ibn Zarza, a 14th century Jewish philosopher, says that Saturn rules over, quote, the Ethiopians, the Sandian, the Tabian, and the Berber nations, and the Jews are all under Saturn's influence, unquote. This is Memnon. Greek traditions told of Memnon, a legendary Nubian king who had fought in the Trojan War. They spoke of Nubia's people who were the tallest and handsomest on earth, and whose piety, hold on, I've got a dog who's, Juno, come on, out. Okay, I have the Sagittarian dog. Anyway, a legendary Nubian king who had fought in the Trojan War. They spoke of Nubia's people who were the tallest and handsomest on earth, and whose piety was so great that the gods preferred their offerings to those of all other men. They also knew that historical Nubian kings had once conquered Egypt and ruled it for 60 years, and that their dynasty was counted as Egypt's 25th. The Greeks, however, did not call these people Nubians, or Cushites as we do today. They called them Ethiopians, which in Greek meant burnt-faced ones. The Greeks knew perfectly well that Nubians were black-skinned, as are the Sudanese of the same regions today, unquote. And this is from Racism and the Rediscovery of Ancient Nubia by Timothy Kendall. Cushites were a wealthy and powerful civilization from 1070 BC to 350 AD. The Cushites are now recognized as having sponsored an important renaissance of Egyptian art and culture. They developed an almost scholarly interest in ancient Egyptian traditions and have actually been called the first Egyptologists. The empire over which they presided was greater in extent than any other achieved in antiquity along the Nile Valley. Their kings were said never to have condemned prisoners to death. They forgave their enemies and allowed them to retain their offices. They gave public credit for achievement in their inscriptions to individuals other than themselves. Such characteristics among other ancient monarchs of Egypt or Near Asia are unheard of, and we can only assume that these were native Nubian qualities. Yet for Egyptologists of the first half of the 20th century, the fact that they were Negro marked this period as the lowest level to which Egyptian civilization had sunk in all its history. And that again is from Racism and the Rediscovery of Ancient Nubia. Tabians are from Egypt, Thebes specifically. In modern day, Luxor and Karnak occupy the site of ancient Thebes, and its surrounding area features the Valley of the Kings, the Valley of the Queens, the Temple of Ramses II and III, and the Grand Temple complex of Queen Hatshepsut. You are looking at here a picture of the Colossi of Memnon. That's the Ethiopian figure we had seen before. And they were named after the Nubian hero, which the Greeks celebrated. In ancient times, it was said that the statue emitted mysterious sounds only at dawn, and that these sounded like the strings of a harp. The Egyptians believed that it was Memnon singing to his mother Eos, the Titaness goddess of the dawn, who mourned his death in the Battle of Troy. Sandians, which was part of that list that we had earlier, are from Iraq, specifically Baghdad. Founded in the 8th century, Baghdad was the center of the Arab Caliphate during the Golden Age of Islam, which lasted until the 13th century. During this time, Baghdad was an important center of learning. Scholars of the Muslim world made important contributions in both sciences and humanities. Under Abbasid rule, Baghdad became a city of museums, hospitals, libraries, and mosques. One of the most famous centers of learning was Bait al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, which attracted teachers and students who worked together to translate Greek manuscripts, preserving them for all time. Baghdad was destroyed in 1258 by the Mughals, who slaughtered over 200,000 residents, and the libraries, museums, and great treasures were looted and forever ruined. The Berber nations. Berbers are indigenous North African people. They lived in Africa long before the arrival of the Arabs, and their culture probably dates back more than 4,000 years. It was the Arabs who enlisted the Berbers in their conquest of Spain, and from the very beginning, Islam was the ideological stimulus for the rise of Berber dynasties. Actually, Berbers converted to Islam to avoid paying taxes levied on them by non-Muslim peoples, but that's another story. The Berbers invaded Spain in 711. The conquest was complete in 716, when Seville fell to the forces of Islam. A brilliant Arab-speaking society flourished on Spanish soil until 1492, when the last Muslim ruler was thrown out. At the top of the Islamic Spanish society were the Muslim rulers. More often than not, they were Berbers. Underneath them were Spaniards who converted to Islam, Spanish Christians who adopted Islam manners and mores, and then the Jews who found that the crescent was much more tolerant of the synagogue than the cross had ever been. From the 13th through 15th centuries, the Iberian Peninsula was home of most major Kabbalists. Saturn rules over ancient civilizations, golden ages of learning, and cultures that have vanished or have fallen into ruin. Saturn also rules over cultures that are stubbornly other. They maintain their outsider status, refusing to be converted, resisting assimilation. You may also know that this list of peoples that I just shared with you are distinctly non-Christian. One could even say anti-Christian. One could even say anti-Christ. Saturn rules over the defeated, the abandoned, the impoverished, the overthrown. Now decrepit, old, weak, and vilified, they make up the lowest rungs of society. Here we have a later version of Saturn in his chariot. The chariot is drawn by dragons. There's Aquarius on the wheel, Capricorn on this wheel, and there's a child in front. And Saturn is an image that I think we're all pretty familiar with, eating the children. And underneath are people who are working the land, and it is a hard, impoverished, hardworking life. I will make a note very quickly here because I'm going to juxtapose it in just a moment. Capuchin monks are serving the elderly. So it's monks who have taken vows of poverty, who are serving the elderly and giving them comfort, okay, in this land. All right, just again, dragons, scythe, swallowing children. The basic Saturn motifs. I want to juxtapose this for a moment, if I could, very quickly here, with the children of Jupiter. Here you see Jupiter on a chariot, which is drawn by peacocks, which are associated to his wife, Juno. The wheels on his chariot are Pisces and Sagittarius, the signs that he rules. And he rules them. I mean, look how dominant he is as a figure. And the person in front of him is not being eaten alive. The person in front of him is showing showing reverence and holding up his goblet in hopes that Jupiter might favor him with a coin or two. Okay, so here we see Jupiter as a planet of bounty, of prosperity, reward. And is there anything remotely impoverished about this world that Jupiter rules? I'll just walk you through it very quickly, or note rather very quickly. This is the Pope over here, who at the time of this engraving is the most powerful figure in Europe or the civilized world. And he is attended by cardinals and bishops. And in the background over here, tucked away in the corner, is the emperor. So the Pope may share, in name, rulership with the emperor, but it's the Pope who's powerful. But Jupiter, and this is the important point, rules over popes and emperors, all right? These are the heads of government. These are the powerful, the elite. Jupiter rules over what is now called the top 1%. Everything is beautiful and resplendent in the world of Jupiter, which begs the question, who is history written by? The winners or the losers? The greatest center of human sacrifice to the god Saturn Kronos was in Carthage. This god was originally called Baal Amun. When Carthage became Hellenized, he was renamed Baal Kronos or Baal Saturn. The Greek historian Diodorus reports that Carthaginians began by sacrificing the noblest of their sons, but over time they secretly started purchasing children of lower birth to use as their replacements in human sacrifice. Evidently, over time, Baal Kronos had turned against them because it was during the war with Agathocles, which wasn't going so well, that the Carthaginians decided to go back to sacrificing the nobles' children in order to appease the god. And so they sacrificed them publicly. Diodorus goes on to describe that there was in their city a bronze image of Kronos, extending its palms up and sloping toward the ground so that each of the children, when placed thereon, rolled down and fell into a sort of gaping pit filled with fire. Here we see a later version of Baal Kronos. It's a depiction of Saturn and his children, and you'll note again the two signs of that Saturn is devouring, an innocent, thankless child. But notice how he is connected to wheat and to farming. Okay, it's a hard life, but people are actually harvesting and there's wealth to be gained from this. So Saturn is kind of making a transition here in art history from being just, hardship and ruin and the things that nobody wants to do. And now he's starting to show or reflect a change in wealth, that these people are farming, but they're also, providing wealth. Anyway, Baal was an ancient Canaanite and Mesopotamian deity, Baal, B-A-A-L, associated with agriculture. He was believed to be the giver of life, and mankind was dependent on him for providing what was necessary to sustain the farms, flocks, and herds. He was also called the son of Dagon, who was in control of the grain, and Hadad, the storm god who would provide plentiful rains after hearing his voice, which was thunderous. Accusations of the ritual killing and eating of babies were often made against minority religions in the ancient world. In the 2nd century CE, the early Christian writer Tertullian complained, quote, "We, Christians, are said to be the most criminal of men on the score of our sacramental baby killing and the baby eating that goes along with it," unquote. And the accusations that were made against Christians then went on to be made, and more often, against the Jews. Blood libel is an accusation that Jews kidnapped and murdered Christian children for their blood. The belief was that the Jews required human blood for matzahs, for Passover. Blood libels asserted that the blood of Christian youths was especially coveted, and these claims were brought against the community in court, materialized whenever a Christian child mysteriously disappeared or went missing. In some cases, the victims of these sacrifices became venerated as saints, as seen here in this depiction of the martyrdom of William of Norwich, who died in 1144. Blood libel was responsible for mob violence against the Jews. The blood libel led to trials and massacres of Jews in the Middle Ages and early modern times. It was revived by the Nazis. If I can return for an instant to this woodcut, here's the woodcut, Saturn and Saturn of his children, Saturn and his children. I want you to sort of focus this time, it's hard because it's very complex, there's a man in stocks, perhaps you can see him here, and then there is a man talking to this other fellow in the stocks. And if you look closely, and I'm going to show it to you here, the man talking to him is Jewish because he is wearing the Jewish badge. This is a close-up on it. This is the man in stocks, and this is the fellow talking to him, and he's identified with the Jewish badge right here. The Jewish badge was a yellow cloth circle worn by Jewish men and women as identifiers. This was to prevent them from engaging in interreligious sexual relationships. It was the forerunner to the Jewish star badge that appeared in Nazi Germany. So here we have, sort of unpacking for a moment here, the Saturn motif. He's in a chariot. He carries a zithe, which is an agricultural instrument. It's also associated with death, whether it's the cutting of the wheat or the cutting down of people in their prime. But here is the scythe from the castration of his father, Uranus. And he is no longer a king, so he's wearing a common hat. And he is on a chariot which is pulled by dragons, which I sort of want you to sort of note the particular attitude of these dragons. The dragons are not looking forward, they're actually looking back. They're looking back over their shoulder, and they're looking back at their own tails. In European texts, the lunar nodes were associated with dragons. The north node, the ascending node, was called Caput Draconis, which means the head of the dragon. And the south node, the descending node, was called Cauda Draconis, the tail of the dragon. So Saturn's association with eclipses, you know, the dragons are his creature, they pull his vehicle. Saturn's association with eclipses is an association with the swallowing of the lights. And this continues the malevolent theme of Saturn as it begins to go into or becomes connected with eclipses. Dragons devour the sun and the moon, thereby blocking the light at day and blocking the light at night. Saturn, being banished to the netherworld, naturally lent itself to witches and everything that was demonic. And here is a print by Albrecht Dürer. You see the witch holding her broom. She's old. She's holding her broom and she's riding a goat, which is associated to Capricorn, backwards. She is old and decrepit like Saturn. The goat is connected to Capricorn. Remember for a moment here, if I can remind you, or I'll remind you, or why don't I point this out? Saturn is in its joy in the 12th house. The house of secret enemies, the house of slavery, the house of poverty and prisons. It is known as the bad daemon. It's the element of society who cannot fend for themselves and who are seen as villainous and dangerous. It's not hard to see the racism, the anti-Semitism that's wrapped up in descriptions of Saturn. Descriptions that we as astrologers, perhaps without knowing it, repeat and pass down to younger generations. Remember that the women accused of witchcraft were often poor or single mothers living on the edge of society, or women who were targeted by their communities because they had produced no male offspring and were in line to inherit their husband's estate. You see, if a woman if a woman who had produced no male heir died before her husband, then the male's property upon his death went to the community. But if the husband died before his wife, the property remained with her, making her an object of envy and covetousness, something that could be removed with the accusation of witchcraft. So in light of that, we can go ahead and add misogyny to the list. Saturn was associated in the minds of the European population with anything that was dark, demonic, and other. As I said, history is written by the winners, and it's the losers, as we all know, who are demonized, thrown over. Now I'm going to go through this quickly. When I usually give this in America, everyone's like, oh, I know who that is. And you guys may or may not know these people, but there's a point to bringing them up. I want you to think about that idea that history is written by the winners and it's the losers who are demonized. I'm going to show you 3 children of Saturn, and I want you to think of the words demonized, outsider, and thrown over. And I want you to think of what kind of personality does this produce. The first person, I don't know if he's that well known in England, is Howard Stern. Howard Stern was basically in America the first of the shock jocks and the most wealthy and the most successful. He used bathroom humor, basically to make points, and he was the radio show that people commuting to work would listen to all the time. He made himself famous with dirty jokes and puns and twists and things like that. But what he would do as part of his humor was always use himself. He would go on and basically mock himself with a sort of self-flagellating intensity and got everyone laughing. Like he once made a remark that he was hung like an acorn, and so it was like guy humor and stuff like that. And then he would spend the rest of his segment going on about Jews, blacks, gays, men, women, dwarves, and with this malice, with this intensity. And so many people regard him as the first shock jock. And when America really starts heading in this direction of being malicious towards the elite, towards being politically correct, it was the way of laughing at what's this politically correct. There was a kind of virility in this attack that Howard Stern launched. And what's interesting, I take this from an article that David Remnick wrote about him in the New Yorker, is that he is in true tradition a satirist. The instinct of satire, Remnick writes, is conservative. There are exceptions, but the tendency of satirists has always been to lash out at intellectualism, at utopian dreaming, at immigrants and fads. All that seems new and threatening to the existing order of things. Aristophanes in his plays attacked Socrates and the sophists all the time. They were the liberal party of Aristophanes' day. But at the same time, it was always linked with sex. And if you know Aristophanes, then you know his joke, not his joke, his play Lysistrata, which was a sexual strike that women play where they will not sleep with men who go to war, leaving men lonely with their hard-ons. So this is kind of a theme that goes back to Aristophanes, that if you've ever heard Howard Stern, you hear it repeated over and over again. And of course, in his horoscope, he is a Capricorn. I regard Saturn as being a ruling planet because he's a Capricorn. Born on an eclipse, or very, very close to it, with Mercury ruling the ascendant and going up into the 9th house where the sun is in its joy. And this is someone who very much makes his living through broadcasting and is known for this. You see the ruling planet Saturn and Mars next to each other in Scorpio, which can be very malicious. Mars is in its joy, it rules the Saturn in Scorpio, and so it's unyielding, it never stops. The man is still working, he's still making an extraordinary amount of money, but this kind of like attack is non-ending. Another child of Saturn, Bill Maher over here, is known, he's an Aquarius, and he's known, you'll see that he has a Saturn in Sagittarius, for going after religion. His big culprit is intellectuals and people who are religious, and showing up the hypocrisy. And again, that Saturn is next to the Mars, and it delights in sort of showing off the hypocrisy. And in Saturnian time, and in Saturnian fashion, the name of his show is Real Time with Bill Maher. And then the last person that I wanted to share with you is Rush Limbaugh, who just received the Medal of Honor from President Trump. Anyway, Rush Limbaugh is famous for harnessing, the white man rage, the white man anger, at being belittled, and throwing it, at, again, the elites or the intellectuals. So and he also is a Capricorn. Venus rising, of all things, in Aquarius. I mean, it's really, and that Venus becomes really powerful because she also, she's in mutual reception with Saturn, which is exalted in Libra. So you get, and then Mars, of course, is taking the, but anyway, what I want to show you is that the very strong presence of Saturn here. And what's so fascinating to me is how Venusian this chart kind of is, you know, and that he has this appeal, this Venusian appeal to people, and particularly here in America, white men who are very angry and feel like they have been castrated. Also, I want to note here the sun is in the 12th house as well, the house of the bad daemon. And he takes pleasure in putting fear into a lot of people. So if you remove the politics for the moment, you will see that these are three people who are coming from a very particular place of feeling themselves, and this is even in their persona, marginalized. They're tremendously successful people, but they still feel marginalized. Scapegoats, that people are after them. They feel like outsiders and like they themselves are the victims of hypocrisy and double standards. In fact, their whole purpose is to call out the elites on their hypocrisy, and this is what they use like a hammer. They are the voice of the put upon people, the people who aren't being heard. They speak the hard truths that aren't being faced. They're the rage that lies underneath. This is a woodcut from 1484 depicting the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in the zodiac sign of Scorpio. Jupiter's on the left, and he is portrayed as a cleric, okay? A spiritual man, but also a very wealthy one, an elite one, okay? And Saturn is over here on the right. It looks like a hockey puck, but it's really a scythe. He's the common man, the hard worker, the person who's toiling in the fields. The woodcut is from the title page of an almanac prophesying another peasant revolt like the one that had taken place in 1381, where the workers, the peasants, rose up against those in power. Now, the takeaway from this is that Jupiter is connected to the elite, while Saturn represents the peasants, the downtrodden. Saturn is connected to rebellion. He overthrows his father, right? Which isn't an idea that's normally associated with the planet, although it's listed as a planetary trait, all right? The modern day version of Saturn, or the children of Saturn, I submit to you, are the Trump supporters, okay? These are the people who have felt left behind, marginalized, trodden upon, laughed at. In his book, The Shipwrecked Mind, Mark Lilla asks, why are there no books about reactionaries? He says, you see, you can go and read all sorts of blog posts and essays on revolutionaries, but there's almost nothing written on reactionaries, just an abiding assumption that they are all ignorant and retrograde. The spirit of revolution that inspires people to storm the barricades may come and go like the Spring of Nations of 1848 or the Arab Spring of 2011. But the spirit of reaction that rises up against it has proven to be an equally powerful, immovable object. Reactionaries aren't conservative. They are just as radical as their revolutionary counterparts. But where the revolutionary sees the shimmering vision of utopia that lies just beyond the next bend, the reactionary sees an empty mirage in the desert, enticing us to our doom. Lilla describes the reactionary as a shipwrecked mind, watching the debris of paradise drift past his eyes. He is time's exile, the reactionary, immune to modern lies perpetrated by intellectuals, writers, journalists, and professors, sees the past in all its splendor, and he feels himself in a stronger position than his adversary because he believes he is the guardian, because he believes that he is the guardian of what actually happened and not the prophet of what might be, unquote. Let me just check here on, okay. On time. Okay. How am I doing time-wise?
Yep, you're doing absolutely fine. It's 1 hour.
Okay. I have a few more things.
Yeah, carry on.
Is it all right to carry on?
Absolutely, Christopher. Yeah, please do.
Okay. Okay. It's going to be carrying on, though. It's not just a minute or two.
Okay.
But it will be intriguing if you're here so far. Okay. So.
Well, we might cut short the Q&A session.
Okay.
A little bit. But please do carry on.
Ceres. The asteroid was discovered by the Catholic priest Giuseppe Piazzi on January 1st, 1801 at 8:10 p.m. Palermo, Italy. Ceres is a child of Saturn in mythology, right? But now she's also a child of Saturn in astrology. Saturn's her ruling planet. The sickle, if you may notice, is sacred to both Ceres and Saturn. Indeed, Saturn's symbol turned upside down is the symbol for Ceres. Both gods, the god and the goddess, are in charge of teaching mankind the art of agriculture. Named after the goddess of the grain, we get the word cereal from Ceres, and Ceres is the asteroid that rules over our daily bread, both literally and metaphorically. And since planets and asteroids, perhaps, appear at a time when something new emerges into the world of the collective unconscious, we see that 2 years after Ceres' discovery here in the United States purchases the Louisiana Territory from France, which basically doubles the size of our country at that time, and becomes referred to as the breadbasket of America, that part of the United States. I just wanted to show here that this is Ceres' birth chart. She has Saturn rising in Leo, and she is a sun in Capricorn, so she's born under Saturn. That's just for the asteroid. But what I wanted to sort of unpack here and explore, just because I'm offering images, I don't really know what these even mean. But I think we're all pretty much familiar with the story of Ceres or Demeter and her daughter Persephone, who gets swallowed up by the earth, which is already a kind of Saturnian theme, right? The daughter gets swallowed up by the earth. But what I wanted to focus on with her myth are three ideas. The first is Eleusis is the place where she forms her cult. When she is searching for her daughter, she's bereaved and full of grief looking for her daughter. She's hired by a queen to be a nurse to the queen's son, the infant prince Demophon. And so Demeter, who the queen can't recognize because she's disguised as an old woman, an old nurse, nurses Demophon with nectar and ambrosia of the gods each day, and each night she goes and puts the baby on the fire amongst the other logs that are burning, okay, which kind of, to my mind, brings back the motif of the children being sacrificed to the belching fire to Kronos. So at night she goes and she puts the baby on the fire amongst the logs, but what she's doing is that she's trying to immortalize the baby by burning away the mortal parts. And so she's feeding ambrosia, nectar of the gods, and burning away the mortal parts at night until she's caught in the act by Queen Metanira, who thought that Demeter's trying to do her son harm, and catches her, and Demeter reacts, and they have this, scandal moment, and then Demeter reveals that she's actually a goddess, and that the queen has caught her, interrupted her in this act of blessing to the child. Well, of course, the queen, like Adam and Eve after having eaten from the fruit of the tree, regrets having interrupted Ceres. She's like, continue, and Ceres is like, no, I will not continue. Your child will be mortal and die like everyone else. And she's horrified, and the court is horrified, and they're like, oh my God. And so she says, but I will teach you a sacred mystery if you will build me a temple here. And they build her a temple, and this is the Elysian Mysteries, in which Pindar says, happy, if you've been indoctrinated, initiated into this mystery, happy is he who has seen this before descending underground, the mystery. He knows that the end of life is also its beginning. And so what I kind of find, I just want to sort of loop off here really quickly, is that this idea of reincarnation is connected. I mean, you see reincarnation in all agricultural societies because seeds come back, you know, the plant dies off in the autumn and seeds come back in the spring. And if plants can do that, why can't we? So reincarnation is a theme that you see in agricultural societies. And obviously Ceres is an agricultural goddess. So that's the first idea that I wanted to plant in your mind with a connection with her. The second one is that Ceres is the only deity to go up against Zeus and win. Saturn battles Zeus and he loses. Anyone who goes up against Zeus loses, but Ceres goes up against Zeus and she wins. She's the goddess of the plebs, the common folk. And by bringing famine on the land so that farmers produce nothing from the earth, the farmers cannot sacrifice to the gods. And this is how Ceres or Demeter brings Zeus to his knees. She cuts off the supply chain. And so he can't help but go and pursue much more vigilantly than he had before the fate of Persephone. And of course, Persephone is returned to Ceres and all is made good again. So it's those ideas of like the burning of the child. I don't really quite know, but it's a motif and it shows up again. And she's the only one who does it. The second one, which is the reincarnation. Okay, the idea that if you know the end is the beginning, then you will be okay or comfortable with death. And then this idea of fighting heaven, fighting the gods. And in her case, a woman winning, which is an extraordinary thing. This is an image of Saturn. He's recoiling. People are trying to offer him gifts of agriculture and he's pulling away. It's a very curious gesture to me. It caught my eye. But what really caught my eye was, you know, this body language, which is I'm pulling away from you, very Saturnian. But he's holding a snake that's swallowing its own tail, which is a symbol of Saturn, the Ouroboros. And to me, it is just so fascinating because Ouroboros was seen as a symbol of eternity, okay? But Ouroboros can also be seen as the unending cycle of reincarnation, you know, and in that it represents the horror of life, the horror of time, of coming back again and again, like some sort of cosmic version of Groundhog Day. And so this also shows up as an image. Here is Ouroboros again. And here is this fascinating French manuscript, which combines all these different ideas. So you have Saturn devouring the child holding scythe, Venus springing up, you know, with like mirror and comb. So we know that that's her. Zeus is castrating Saturn, who had castrated Uranus, but now it's Zeus castrating Saturn. And then you could see over here Ouroboros, the dragon, which is swallowing its own tail. I know it's rather bloody and graphic, but I thought it was also a very fascinating image to be showing up here. Saturn is associated with, we've talked about the lowly, but Saturn is associated with the intellectual elite. And here is from Christine de Pizan, who modifies or introduces the children of the planets from Islamic culture into European culture, France particularly. And so Saturn reigns over scholars, thinking men. And we have this return again to the idea of Sabbath, Shabbat, where one stops all action. And this is the last bit that I wanted to really share with you, if I may, very quickly. And what I am sharing with you is my favorite Saturn parable. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. I love this book. It's Lost Horizon by James Hilton. It was written in 1932, and it introduced the world to a place called Shangri-La. It's the story of Hugh Conway, a British consul in Afghanistan who disappears under mysterious circumstances. Conway had once been an intellectual lion, a golden boy at school, but trench warfare leaves him a relic of himself. He is plagued by what's called nervous exhaustion, the telltale sign of melancholia. We would call it post-traumatic stress syndrome. During the evacuation of this base, which is in Afghanistan, Conway and his vice consul, Charles Mallinson, board an airplane that is also carrying an American businessman named Bernard and a British missionary named Miss Brinklow. But instead of flying to Peshawar, which is where they were supposed to go, they head up and over the mountains towards Tibet. As the plane climbs higher and higher and higher, Conway grows drowsy because of the lack of oxygen. It's the seventh heaven. He experiences a kind of high. The plane is ascending through the spheres as it climbs to the seventh heaven, which we know is associated with ecstasy. Here is the lack of oxygen that's causing that, and also a drowsiness. Eventually, the plane runs out of gas and they crash land in the snow. The pilot dies, but not before telling Conway to seek refuge at a nearby lamasery named Shangri-La, a place that Conway, being relatively familiar with this mountainous terrain, has never heard of before. Conway and his companions are actually rescued by Sherpas who take them to Shangri-La, which is located in a hidden valley and populated by inhabitants who are hundreds of years old. Now, the residences have all the modern amenities. There are gardens and fields that fill the valley, and towering above it all is this mountain, Karkal, which translates as Blue Moon, a mountain that's more than 28,000 feet high. While waiting for an audience with the High Lama, Conway meets a young and beautiful Manchu girl who sits down to play the harpsichord. She plays a piece that sounds to Conway like Mozart and another one that sounds like Scarlatti, but he doesn't recognize them. In fact, as Conway inspects the library, he finds books by authors he's familiar with, but whose titles are totally unknown to him. Conway meets with the High Lama, and over a series of interviews that unfold over weeks, he discovers that Shangri-La is indeed a sacred valley where time has stood still, and where one will age slowly as long as you remain in this valley. Once you leave, however, that aging process kicks in quickly. Shangri-La has been charged with the task of preserving the treasures of civilization so that they are not destroyed in the great wars to come. The High Lama then confides in Conway that being 250 years old, that's the High Lama, he is dying, and he has actually chosen Conway to become the leader of the lamasery. Conway and his companions are to stay there forever. Now this sits well with Miss Brinklow, who wants to convert everyone to Christianity. She's got all the time in the world and all these people to convert. And the American businessman Barnard, who's hiding from the law, from stock fraud. And Conway himself, this is a scholar's dream, is looking forward to living a contemplative's life. However, it's his vice consul, Charles Mallinson, who can't stand the isolation and tedium and is eager to get back to the real world. Moreover, Mallinson has fallen in love with the young Manchu girl who played the harpsichord earlier, and she is also eager to join her new beloved. Feeling the weight of responsibility as well as feelings of protection that he has towards the girl, Conway agrees to help them out. And of course, no sooner are they outside of Shangri-La than they get lost in the snow. Mallinson falls off a cliff in a blizzard, and Conway succumbs to the freezing cold. He wakes later in a French mission hospital where the nuns tell him that he was brought in by an old Asian woman who promptly died when she delivered him there. The book ends with Conway going off in search of a way back to Shangri-La, and whether he makes it back or not, we never know. Saturn rules time, but it also rules over those timeless places like Avalon, El Dorado, Brigadoon, and Never Never Land. Hilton Shangri-La is based on traditions in the Far East that speak of a hidden paradise. Early Buddhist writings call it Changsha-Bala and describe it as a source of ancient wisdom. There was a belief in China that the Kunlun Mountains were rumored to contain a valley where immortals lived in perfect harmony. In Indian tradition, there was a place called Kalapa, north of the Himalayas, where dwelled a perfect people. In Russia, it was said that if the path of the Tartars was followed all the way back to Mongolia, you would discover a place where holy men lived apart from the world in a land of what was called the White Waters. Shambhala, another name for Shangri-La, was reported to lie north of Tibet. But the question is, would we want it if we could have it? Could we put down our burdens, give up our social media, leave the concerns, ties, and obligations of our day-to-day world to pursue and dwell in this paradise? It is not for everyone. As Ficino writes in his 3 books of life, quote, finally the contemplative mind, which withdraws itself not only from what we generally perceive, but also from what we generally imagine or express in our human customs, That mind expresses itself in a certain measure to Saturn. To this faculty alone is Saturn propitious, for just as the sun is hostile to nocturnal animals, but friendly to those who are active in daylight, so is Saturn an enemy of those people who overtly lead a commonplace life, or, though they flee the company of vulgar people, still do not lay aside their vulgar thoughts. For Saturn, resigned to Jupiter, common life, but retained the sequestered and divine life for himself. Men whose minds are truly withdrawn from the world are his kin, Saturn's kin, and in him they find a friend, for Saturn himself is, Ficino says, to speak in Platonic terms, a Jupiter to those souls who inhabit the sublime spheres, in the same way as Jupiter is a helpful father to those who live in ordinary life. Instead of earthly life from which he himself is cut off, Saturn confers heavenly and eternal life on you. And there we have it.
Thank you very much, Christopher. That was amazing. That was such a fascinating talk. I'm sure that everybody's hanging on to every word that you said. Saturn looks and feels very different to me now after your talk, actually, Christopher. We haven't got many questions because I suspect because everybody was hanging on to your every word. We had a question, if I may convey a couple to you early on, which I'm just finding in the chat from Caroline. She asks, is it recorded that Saturn was also monstrous or disgusting in some other way, like the other progeny?
Yeah, that's great.
Children were hideous.
That's a great question. I think Saturn, you know, like the ones that were hideous, right? But I love that idea. Yeah, let's play around with that one. You know, maybe he was, you know, because he's not one of these glorious titans or titanesses, right? I mean, they're bringing the dawn and the dusk and, you know, he's the leader of them, but we don't know. And he's down in the pits. So, yeah, maybe he had really bad halitosis.
Okay. I've got a question, Christopher, which is that about half an hour into your talk, you showed a couple of pictures where you mentioned the faces at the bottom of the pictures. Had Saturn and then this face of Sun, Jupiter and Venus, I think. I just wondered, did you mean the decans?
Probably.
Of those signs?
Probably.
Capricorn and Aquarius.
Or the terms.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember how many degrees a face is anyway.
It's 10 per, and so it's the planets that rule over. It's probably terms. It's probably the 10 degrees.
Right. Okay. So each of the two signs is divided into three 10-degree sections ruled by different planets. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Chris Mitchell says, "What a fantastic talk, Christopher. Very deep, lots of fascinating insights, but presented with such an accessible and humorous touch. It was really clear." And he says it's the best exposition of Greek mythology he's ever heard.
Thank you.
And he's
Thank
right.
You for giving my bad pronunciation of everything.
It's great. Really, really interesting. And you totally brought it to life.
I'm glad. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm just seeing if there are more questions and comments. Yeah, lots of appreciation in the chats, in the chat section. Wonderful talk, wonderful, thank you. Somebody's clapping.
Oh, yeah.
Gillian Crawford, thank you very much, Christopher. I thoroughly enjoyed the humour at the beginning and various illustrations. Interesting that Saturn rules over the working poor and intellectual elite, but not the rich or religious elite. There seem to be different themes pulling apart from each other with regard to Jupiter and Saturn. Yeah.
Which maybe we can appreciate this year, right?
Yeah.
With Jupiter and Saturn both in Capricorn, and that where we see the rising up of, the people, and then, the elites are not, and so what I like is that it kind of makes us question Capricorn. It makes us question Saturn, which I think are often portrayed, as stuffed shirt, very capitalistic and whatever. And it's like, hold on there. Mm. Because that was a big thing for me to do with this talk, was to show how we have this assumption about this planet and those two signs, which I feel personally is mistaken. It's not supported by what was being passed down generationally.
And I thought it was really interesting, the 3 example charts that you had of Rush Limbaugh, Howard Stern and Bill Maher, their links with Capricorn, but also what you were saying about them and reactionaries, that they see themselves as outsiders and the dispossessed, in a way, the castrated, if you like. But I guess perhaps there's a difference between their outsiderness and some other people's outsiderness, in that they have power, and they perhaps feel they're losing their power, but they certainly haven't always been powerless. Straight white males in America are quite powerful beings.
The case of Howard Stern is fascinating, actually, because he was powerless. He came from not a lot of money.
Okay.
And he actually was in one of the first, or the first, integrated neighborhood, like on Roosevelt Island or something like that. And so his parents were liberal, and they were going to stand by, this social experiment, this bringing in of Black and brown people. And what happened is all the white people left instantly. And his parents defiantly stayed, to show. And he got roughed up, beaten up at school on a regular basis. Okay. And so what's fascinating is that there was so much, he speaks of racism as knowing no color, that it applies to everyone.
Right. Yeah.
And that he was a victim of it and beaten, and really quite terribly, as it. And again, that kind of anger, propels him forward. So, there's a quality to Saturn that is angry. I mean, I think we too quickly give that over to Mars and say that that's, these are both malefics, and that, and again, these 3 gentlemen that I was pointing out, and Graham, I'm so relieved to hear that you're familiar with them. Their power is from the powerlessness. They are the voice of these people who feel powerless, and that's what they've funneled, so I found it to be an intriguing twist on Saturn.
Great, thank you. I'll unmute everybody in a minute, but I just wanted to say, read out a couple more comments, Christopher, from Deborah Mandelli. Truly awesome, best talk I've heard for a very long time, great delivery. Teresa Belmain, great talk. Oh, she had trouble getting access. So she's asking if there will be a recording. Yes, we will put our recording onto our YouTube channel, Aquarius 7's YouTube channel. Lots of other appreciative comments. Rebecca Law says, thank you very much. I hope I hear more tales from the Greek mythology from you. Wonderful. And she says a face is 10 degrees. So.
oh, does that mean I got it right? I haven't heard Sagittarius, so it's haphazard.
Yeah. That was me. I was getting confused. So yeah, lots of appreciative comments. So I'm going to unmute everybody now. So we won't have our traditional Q&A section because we've overrun a bit. So we'll just go. We'll head straight for the virtual bar, so we can all have a chat. And I'm sure, if you're happy to stay, Christopher, then I don't know if you're happy to stay.
Yeah, is it okay?
Yeah, please do. Yeah, I mean, people might want to ask questions, but it'll be a little less formal. So I'm going to unmute everybody now. I just want to say thank you from me and from the Aquarius 7 committee, and from, I'm sure, everybody here, I'm going to unmute everybody so everyone can join in with a round of applause. That was a really interesting, great talk. Thank you so much, Christopher.
Yeah, really.
Fantastic.
An honor. It's an honor.